has had a series of lovely sessions.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Professor Saab. I mean, I haven't had the pleasure to really meet you and, get to know you better. In fact, it's been on my mind, even though it's surprising that we haven't met, but I hope
Yes,
to see you very
that's
soon.
right.
I hope to see you very soon.
Yeah, you
Thank
remember we were together on the same program that um, say the Punjab University organized on creative writing.
I believe so. I
Yeah,
believe
I
so.
think you
Yes.
spoke on one day, and the next day I was one of the speakers.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, Bashu, we may begin now.
Yes. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this program hosted by the Department of English, Kareem City College, Jamshedpur, Jharkhand. We are very, very happy to have you with us today as we look forward to a very special session of Writers Beyond Distance with academic and novelist Sakoon Singh. Writers Beyond Distance has been a kind of platform for our students and our faculty members to interact with, as the title says, writers who are beyond geographical distances. So it was a kind of brainchild of the department during the pandemic period when we were all struggling to keep ourselves emotionally and spiritually alive. And that was a time when we found that it was possible to connect across distances via Google Meet. And we had a series of wonderful sessions, beginning with the poet Tabish Khair, Keki Andaruwala, Geeta Hariharan, Shona Singh Baldwin. We have had a host of speakers speaking to our students, sharing their creativity and their shaping up our students, urging them to be more creative and carrying on this glory we have today with us, Sakoon Singh. We are very happy, we are very privileged, ma'am, that you are with us here today. And I would invite our head of department, Professor Yahya Ibrahim, to formally welcome our guest. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Basu. Uh, on behalf of my college, as the principal is busy in one another event, online event, it's a Constitution Day today, and the Department of Political Science is holding an online meet on Constitution Day. So, taking this opportunity on behalf of my principal, on behalf of all my colleagues in the Department of English, Kareem City College, and yes, of course, on behalf of the management of our college, we heartily extend our welcome to today's guest. As Bashudara was telling us that these events, these online events, helped us a lot to cover the distances, to go beyond the distances, and to meet people whom it was difficult to meet in the physical way, in inviting in the college or in Jamshedpur. So certainly, as Basu was telling, that this program and this event and this internet facility of Google Meet, etc., has provided us the opportunity to see faces, to meet figures, and to listen to the great minds of literature who are creating beautiful literature, who are creating a beautiful world through their pen across the globe. And one such writer is the guest speaker today. Uh, Sakoon Singh, ma'am, we are very grateful that you accepted our proposal, you accepted our request rather, and you are here to enlighten our students. Uh, I also extend our warm welcome to Gurudev Singh sir. He was one of our speakers earlier, and he is always continuously helping us, mentoring us, supporting us by giving several advices, even through the white WhatsApp group that the department has. So, a very warm welcome to Gurudev Singh sir also. Other dignitaries, heartiest welcome to all of you. And a few of our students are joining for the first time, because they are the new entrants to the department. So a heartiest welcome to our students also. Thank you so much, ma'am. We are very grateful and we are looking forward to a great session today. Bashu.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So I will, without wasting further time, because all of us are very eager to hear our guest speaking, I will just introduce formally Professor Sakoon Singh. Sakoon Singh studied English literature at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and at Punjab University, Chandigarh. She has been a recipient of the Fulbright Fellowship and currently teaches Indian literature and cultural studies in Chandigarh. She has published her academic writings extensively, and her contributions include essays in cultural studies in India and in Reading India in a transnational era, both published by Routledge. She has served on the editorial team of Dialogue and edited a special South Asia section for E3W Review of Books published by University of Texas, Austin. She is currently doing a stint as Associate Fellow at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. Her debut novel, In the Land of the Lovers, published by Rupa in the year April 2020, has been shortlisted for the PFC VOW Book Awards 2021. We are more than happy and grateful that ma'am has consented to speak to our students and to talk about her latest work. And over to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Vasudhara, and thank you so much, Professor Abraham. So excited to be face to face with all of you at Kareem City College, and really, somewhere a little dreams taken root that sometime, I would want to visit Steel City. God knows when that will happen, but sometime. It's become a more concrete location, for me in my mind and imagination. And I think that connect will remain now. That is what experiences, do to you. My book, In the Land of the Lovers, a Punjab Kissa, it was released last year, and in the very unique and special circumstances of the pandemic. Actually, they began by releasing it on Kindle. And since the printing press was located in spaces that were under a severe lockdown due to the pandemic, the paper book version of the book was delayed by a good 4 months. I personally had a real existential crisis on my end because somewhere, this doubt came about whether at all, it would see the light of the day as a paperback. Because everybody was, moving very comfortably to the digital platforms and to the digital formats. And since, the paperback was delayed by 4 months, and even in the publication house, I could not really get any concrete answers as to when the paperback would be released. So those 4 months were a bit of an existential anxiety for me, whether, one would see the book in this form. But I was very happy when it was released in August 2020. And, like they say, once the book is released, author is dead. So once the book was released, then of course, I now understand what it is like to release a book, as in into the world. And this question was brought up as to when a formal release will take place. And then again, due to the special circumstances that we were in, there was never a physical function that was held for the book. Not that I was very keen on it, because I feel really these are formalities and these are rituals that we've developed around books. And somewhere books live due to their literary merit. Books live if they speak to the audience. And in the long run, really, formalities like that, nobody remembers. And I'm glad that, it overcame all these hurdles and, got a life of its own beyond a point. Talking about the book and how really I got into it, because primarily I'm an academic and we all belong to the same fraternity. And since, I was at JNU, where the curriculum of MA is slightly more experimental than, the conventional universities, and since the classroom size is very small, we were introduced to academic writing at MA level. Like we were writing research papers with all the, trappings of a research paper. Right from MA first year. And so since then, it's been a long journey for me with academic writing. And even though, as a literature person, you connect with literature in a critical way, in a slightly different way, in the sense that one is analyzing texts from a theoretical perspective. And even though, one's bread and butter is literature, but then you are viewing it in a critical way. And somehow in the past few years in the English departments, we have seen the shift from literature to theory. So therefore, this engagement with theory, I feel, for good reasons or bad, have cut off this umbilical cord that we have with the text itself. In the sense that somewhere, the emphasis on theory has made close readings of the text slightly underrated. But I feel really, even as a good critic, and I'm very influenced by some of the old world critics. If you really look at the way they engaged with the text, uh, over and above theory and beyond theory, it is like really getting into the or under the skin of the text. And that to me was always very inspirational, so that the connect with the literary text was never lost. And somewhere I felt, that is what the real thing is, and we're all making a bread and butter of the real thing. And therefore this aspiration, somewhere it was more organic, this idea to write this book, because I feel that any literature text is very rooted. अगर आपको कोई बोलता है कि फलानी चीज का फैशन चल रहा है, या फलानी तरह की टेक्स्ट जैसे स्पेक फिक है या साइंस फिक्शन है, अब इट्स ट्रेंडिंग, never believe that. That is my take on it. I feel every literature text is very rooted, which I'm not advocating anything against any genre per se, but this whole idea to make trends out of literature is something that I got myself against personally. And I feel that any literary text to have any value has to be rooted, one, and it has to flow out of an experience with a particular amount of conviction. Plus, every writer is rooted in a unique space. And if, as a writer, one is able to capture that particular truth of that space, then that literary text would have certain conviction. If amongst, the students, if some of you looking at writing, या आप में से कुछ ऐसे हैं जिनको लगता है कि मुझे करना चाहिए या एक डिजायर है कहीं, तो सबसे बड़ी चीज तो रीडिंग ही है. How you're going to read, because reading and writing are, two faces of the same coin. It is how deep you're going to read, how broadly you're going to read. उसको इतना आप narrow भी नहीं कर सकते अपने interest को as a reader. So you'll really have to read as broadly as possible when you're trying to develop yourself as a writer, and really come face to face with many influences, which I'm not saying that you lose your voice in the process, but in fact, I think rejection is equally a part of embracing who you are. So by and by, you will arrive at what you would identify as my voice, and that there are no shortcuts to that. There is no one creative class, writing class, that will give you that. To a certain extent, I am a little skeptical of creative writing classes as well, because ये जो writing है, I think ये activity ही इतना, it is close to who you are. आपको आपकी आइडेंटिटी कोई नहीं बता सकता, आप उस एक्सपीरियंस में से निकल कर अपने आप को समझ सकते हैं. बाकी जरूर एक क्राफ्ट है राइटिंग का. यू नो, देयर आर दीज टू साइड्स. One is that what person you are, and then of course there is the craft, which is not to say कि craft जरूरी नहीं है. Craft is very important as a writer. So your आपकी language पे क्या पकड़ है? For me, I'm really old school, and I feel that hold on language is very, very crucial. Whatever language, you know, you claim to be a writer. And वो language कैसे ही develop होती है when we come face to face with the best minds in those languages. And तभी वो canons भी develop होते हैं, आपके जो syllabus develop होते हैं उसी understanding से develop होते हैं. हालांकि बहुत political reasons भी हैं canons बनाए जाने के. We all know that you know, having read post-colonial theory in the way we have read, we understand कि उसमें बहुत बहुत political reasons भी हैं. But हमें narrow-minded होने की भी जरूरत नहीं है. अगर हम यही सोचेंगे कि सिर्फ हमें अपना ही पढ़ना है तो you know, फिर हमारा एक जो सारा approach है वो narrow रहेगा. I think हर culture से, हर तरीके की writing से, you know, you really have to take out what you feel is the best form of writing available to us, because those really are the best minds that are out there. And if you really think about it, it's very magical that somebody wrote in the 15th century, somebody wrote in the 18th century, somebody wrote in the 19th century, and here you are face to face with them. Why are just these black marks on a paper? तो किताब है ही, किताब को आप deconstruct करो तो क्या है? These are black marks on paper. So these black marks on paper have these amazing, it's an amazing capacity to transform you, to transport you into another time and space, and bring you into a very intimate encounter with another mind of another era. So और एक और बात जो कुछ extent तक मैंने, you know, एक ये जो concept है, which I had also used in my PhD thesis, which is this whole culture that develops around any literature. You know, there is a cultural space around every text. So when whatever text you know, we are reading as students, if we try and understand which cultural space it is coming from, you know, apart from those black words on paper, once you understand the cultural space of a text, then you understand where it is coming from. Then you look at other authors that are available in that cultural space, and what made you know, the what went into or behind the possibility of that book. So if, you know, we try and understand text in such a way, then we are encountering you know, these movements, these ways of thinking, these entire philosophical systems that have shaped our, you know, understanding of reality and beyond that. And as for students, वो करते करते, और आप में से कुछ aspirational writers हैं या आप लिखना चाहते हो, तो जो आपको अभी you know, करना है वो यही करना है कि अपनी explorations को उतना wide करना है. And at the same time, writing is a very wonderful thing. ये भी नहीं है कि you know, somebody who only goes to the university or reads is a good writer. I mean, I have great faith in natural writers also. You know, in Punjabi, we have somebody like Lal Singh Dil, you know, who does not have a formal education. But I think the muse is so alive in some of these writers. So really, you know, the circumstances that we are in today, where networking has become very important, where to make your voice heard, you know, you have to like be connected in a certain way. So sometimes I wonder about some of these writers who are naturally gifted writers, but they do not have access to such spaces. So we could be in danger of losing some of those voices until and unless we as society go beyond our conventional understanding of a good writer, which is beyond awards, which is beyond the social understanding of what a writer comes with. So anyway, I'll talk about my novel now. Like I said, that I had like this long experience of writing academic papers, but somewhere I felt that the story was making itself alive in my head, and it was wanting to be told. And when I say it was wanting to be told, I want to underscore or underline that there was a certain desperation on my part. When I started, it wasn't the best of circumstances that I started in the sense that I was hands full with my on my professional front. I was hands full at my home front, and therefore that left me with very little time to physically do this act of writing, because novel requires this you know this blocks of time. वो आप चलते फिरते नहीं कर सकते. एक नॉवल को लिखने के लिए you need to block off a day. And somebody said that only privileged women can really write. And there is truth to that, because there is the whole economics of that, and we can talk about it in some on another day, because that's a whole thesis in itself. But you can understand what I'm trying to imply. And so therefore I felt that in order to give it the attention that it requires, I needed to take off work. And I did that. For a year I took off work, and I started working on this. Now uh, for me, it wasn't a book that started with a plot. It was a book that started with a cluster of stories. And most importantly, it is we have this term buildings roman. Students, shayad BA ke students ke liye naya term hoga, but what it means is, and I'll explain it for the students, what it means is a certain coming of age. It's a novel of coming of age. So the primary protagonist that we have here, Nanki, it is basically her growth. It is her coming of age. And additionally, she is an artist. She's an artist who's based in Chandigarh. She's a young woman. And she's brought up by her grandparents because she's lost her parents in a car crash. Now, it's primarily her story. It is her tale. How she goes from one experience to another. And there is a struggle at the heart of this book. And that struggle I'll talk about slightly later. But how this book becomes a kind of cultural document is that since she's lost her parents, she's brought up by her grandparents who had been dislocated during the partition of Punjab, and they had come to this side of the border. The grandmother and her great grandmother had undertaken this walk after the grandfather had been murdered. These two women had undertaken this walk from that side to this side, and the struggles of this family. In a way, this documents the struggles of this family. Now, the struggles of partition have been documented by many books before, but what is what is about this book, how it documents the struggle, is through the perspective of this younger generation. It is perhaps somebody like me, who has heard these stories of dislocation from my grandparents, or the stories that I heard. If I talk personally, the correspondence between the fictitious characters and the characters in my life, if we try to make that correspondence, it's not about that. It is not autobiographical or strictly autobiographical. But in Punjab, the uprooting of people during partition is almost an archetype. It is an experience that many families have seen, have heard about. For us, we have seen it and heard about it through family stories, through anecdotes, and what we made of it. Like, if personally I would, have to talk about my experience with partition, is when we would visit my grandparents' house. There was this portrait of my great grandmother who I had never met. But, she was this somber looking woman with a white dupatta on her head. And my mother would tell about her that, you know, uh, that sometimes, BG would really cry remembering her days in Pakistan. Then I was told that she had lost her husband there, and she was like a solitary witness to that murder, you know and since her other family members had already left, and she had encouraged them to leave because she wanted to come with her husband, but then the husband died in front of her eyes and he was murdered, and she had to perforce undertake that journey alone. So when I would hear this story, just try and imagine the state of mind of this woman, especially in times when identity of an individual was so closely connected to the identity of a village. There was no other identity. आजकल हमारी जो मल्टीपल आइडेंटिटीज में हम जीते हैं, और ना सिर्फ ये बल्कि हम इतना एक्सपोज्ड हैं to other people's lives, maybe through the social media, that somewhere it has begun to percolate our own identity. But we are talking of times when they lived really insular existence. And Punjab being a land economy, पंजाब की जो एक एग्रीकल्चर के साथ एक कनेक्शन है, वो हमने फार्मर्स मूवमेंट में भी देखा है कि वो ये जो प्रोटेस्ट है, ये सिर्फ एक इकोनॉमिक सवाल नहीं है, ये एक लॉस ऑफ फियर ऑफ लॉस ऑफ आइडेंटिटी इन अ वेरी वेरी प्राइमेबल वे, कि उनकी जो आइडेंटिटी लैंड के साथ है, उस आइडेंटिटी को जब उनको लगा कि वो थ्रेटन्ड है, ये सिर्फ इकोनॉमी की बात नहीं है, इट गोज बियॉन्ड दैट. So I would imagine that kind of an upheaval, even worse, much, much worse, when you're told that now this village is no longer yours, now this house is no longer yours, and you're not even told properly, बस वो अब काफिले निकलने शुरू हो गए, गांव में से. And not only that, it's accompanied by large scale violence. So many people are brutally murdered. And we see that in literature of Manto, we see it in Sakoon Singh, we see all of that graphic violence. And वो बड़ी एक brutal किस्म की जो violence उन लोगों ने first hand देखी, तो वो किस तरह का impact हुआ होगा उस चीज का psyche के ऊपर. So for me, like I said, ये जो stories हैं, ये family anecdotes हैं. I taught Amitabh Ghosh also Shadow Lines also, and you see how he talks about partition in the context of Bengal, and how he talks about Thamma, his grandmother. So उस तरह का एक ये जो refugee का एक psyche है. और ये उस टाइम का एक साइकी को, it is my attempt to understand the psyche of this great grandmother, who becomes like this really strong woman, and she really takes everything in her control when this violence is taking place in the novel. I'm talking this character in the novel. So how she takes care of a pregnant daughter, how she takes care of the funeral of a dead husband, single-handedly rides the horse Tonga, and then single-handedly she's able to get out of that place to a place of safety on the other side. But later on, somewhere perhaps this hope is there in her mind that I will go back to my village. She thinks that all this is temporary, and one day we will go back there. So she's always living with this hope of going back. But when it comes to this point where her son-in-law, who's in the army, and the daughter, they start getting integrated in, this side of Punjab, and, they start carrying on with their lives. And this possibility is out of the question. Or, by and by, she realizes that no, now I will never go back. It is when that how she breaks down at a psychic level. So for me, it is more to understand partition from that aspect. It is from the psyche of this woman. How, she experienced bit by bit this disbelief, this betrayal, of having to just, lose your home and your village, and a whole way of life. So for me, that was, the way in which I imagined Nanki's understanding, this young protagonist's understanding of partition. Because I think as we are moving ahead, we're trying to understand it more more in a cultural space, more in a psychological way. So for me, it was that. Plus, the trope of mirasis, I've used, which are like these tramp-like characters that we have in Punjab, who have this dialogue. Now, these tramp-like characters are very funny at one level, where they have this commentary going on anything and everything current. And at another level, they can be very, very subversive. And they talk just like common people would talk. And so I brought in this dialogue of the Mirasis after each of these blocks that I have in the book, where they conduct this dialogue. So after the partition, they have this dialogue between these two men, who underline this whole experience of partition and the dark side of it, through what you can broadly say is a kind of black humor through which they bring it out. And then now, it is about Nanki's growth. As I said, her grandfather, who's in the army, has had this subordinate officer, जिसको आर्मी में JCO कहते हैं, who also belongs to a village near Jalandhar. And you all are familiar with Fulkari, which is a folk art in Punjab. So I've shown episodes of pre-partition Punjab where this little boy learns Fulkari from the mother. And then he, since he's in a moving job, he's in the army, he's a JCO, he's in a moving job, he moves from place to place. He keeps adding on to that art that he knows. And gradually, after he retires, he makes these stunning, bird embroideries, which is an amalgamation, or it is like his own personal style, which has evolved after all this time. So when I was talking about Nanki's struggle, which is at the heart of the book, I want to talk a little bit about this, that Nanki is actually an artist, and she's a professor in the art college in Chandigarh, where they have opened up the gallery space for other artists. And she sees a lot of nepotism and corruption happening. And she feels that it is actually Joginder Singh, Subedar Joginder Singh, who makes these beautiful embroideries, whose embroideries actually deserve a space there. So my novel also asks these questions about what is art, and who decides what is art, and what is this hierarchy that we have created? Who are these critics who decide what is art? So for Nanki, it's also a bit of a disillusionment, because she had really put this director of the art college on a pedestal, and she had idolized him. But his reality comes out when he's too indulging in nepotism and really selling short the idea of art as she understands it. So I feel that there is an answer there to some of our dilemmas, which is that of these times, which is that sometimes you have to go beyond social conditioning in our understanding of these matters, and especially folk, since folk has withstood the test of time. You see, it does not need the endorsement of X or Y or Z. Folk art is something that has lived through centuries, and people have endorsed it. And the fact that it has lived is a touchstone that any art would aspire for. And the name Nanki is actually a historical character who was Guru Nanak's sister, Nanki. And she was actually said to be the first person to realize, this, uh, the greatness of a brother, as in Guru Nanak did not have a very easy time with the family. Everybody was highly skeptical of his waywardness. They thought that he's not taking to business and that he's not a good fit in that family. It was then, during that time, that and she's said to be the first person to realize that. So I feel that Nanki was prescient in her ways. She had an understanding where she tapped into her own wisdom vis-a-vis other borrowed definitions that we get in society at large, or even through our education. So sometimes we also have to be careful, because our education is also molding us in a particular way. Sometimes it leads to an alienation in a very basic way. और कई बार आपको बहुत ही कुछ आम तरीके से कुछ ट्रुथ समझ आ जाते हैं लाइफ के, जो आपको किताबों में नहीं समझ आते. सो वो जो एक कनेक्शन हमेशा रखना है, शायद जो नानकी कनेक्शन बना के एक रखती है, ओवर एंड अबव, बियॉन्ड what her education is trying to tell her, or what the so-called important people are trying to tell her. I think I was seeing a bigger solution there to some of Punjab's problems also, to some of society's problems also, because we are buying too much into what we are hearing. So always to keep that connect is what Nanki tries to do. And it is her journey, from idealism. I show her that this is really ideal girl. And then, since she's been brought up by her grandparents, so वो एक जो connection with materialism होता है, जो आपके parents आपको provide करते हैं, because parents are very fierce, they want to protect you. But grandparents can still have the luxury of bit of indulgence with you. So here, she's brought up by the grandparents, so वो, and perhaps it is the influence of Gurbani also, it is the influence of Sufi literature also, on which she's fed. So this book kind of takes from there, especially in the pre-partition time I've shown. And one point I want to make is that again, this idea of how Gurbani percolates into their understanding. I just want to say that I'm not looking at it in a very narrow sense of a holy book for Sikhs. I think Guru Granth Sahib is a great literary and poetic text as it exists. And the best part is the cosmopolitan nature of it. In a way, it is an edited volume, because not only all the gurus have contributed to it, many saint poets have contributed to it, including Kabir. So the whole idea of collating wisdom as it was available, Baba Farid lived in the 12th century, and Guru Granth Sahib started getting collated much later. However, they made sure that they included Baba Farid's texts by accessing them through the grandson. So there was a certain vision of bringing together whatever their idea of wisdom as it existed at that time was. So the sheer poetic splendor of it, I mean, in the sense that if you were to just read what Guru Nanak writes about the 12 seasons, about, in Barama, or how certain natural phenomena are explained, how casteism is condemned, how ritualism is condemned. So uh, it's not that I was set up in drawing in a particular way from that text. uh, what I've included in this text is what you would hear in the space of Punjab in a very normal way, in normal conversations. And I feel that that is what also the greatness of this text is, the way it percolates down to common people, how it talks to them, and how it has had this ability to speak beyond classes, beyond religions, beyond all these denominations that we make and divide the world into. So and I feel कि वो जो syncretic ethos है पंजाब का, जो एक composite culture रहा है पंजाब का, that is a beautiful thing, and we need to kind of talk about that more rather than divisions and differences, because there are many many common spaces that we all need. So this is about how should I put it, the environment of the book, uh, that is set in today's Punjab. It is today's Chandigarh. And from there is, of course, it's juggling across time and space. Like I said, there is also the pre-partition Punjab experience, which Naki only knows secondhand, and that comes through. But there's also a very big chunk on contemporary Punjab. The problems that we have, whether it's corruption, whether it's nepotism. So at the end of the day, it is Nanki who is able to stand up for what she deeply is convinced about, which is that actually Joginder Singh's art is true. And whatever it takes, whatever is her struggle, and she's joined in this struggle, by this boyfriend of hers who's Himmat, who belongs to Patiala. And his backstory is another story. Maybe we can have it another day. But he's an architect. That is an important detail. He's an architect and she's an artist. So how both of them go about, embracing this truths that they think is worth all the struggle. And eventually, they're able to bring it to light in whatever ways. There are these 2 or 3. Do we have time? Another 2-3 minutes. I'll talk about some other women characters.
Yes, ma'am, certainly. And you can also please, we would be happy if you would read out, certain sections from your book. We would be happy to hear you reading.
All right, all right. So just 2 minutes about the other characters. There's one character who is in their neighborhood. She's Nina. And she's somebody who runs this boutique. And I would say she's a very stereotypical Punjabi character. She's loud, she's boisterous, she's into very nice clothes. And she likes to, kind of have a good time. But when we try and understand her, she is somebody who, was made to undergo female feticide by her in-laws. And we know in Punjab this problem of gender being skewed exists. So I wanted to somehow talk about that. So in spite of a grief that she has to undergo, which I've shown through episodes, she emerges as somebody who's, like living this very, kind of a very celebratory character, very celebratory life she's living. So that is also something about, a stock understanding of Punjabiyat, that people are loud and boisterous and like to live well. But how I've understood is that somewhere she, because she doesn't have an option, she sublimated all that grief and anger at the altar of, the boutique, the laces and the fabrics, which will, somehow give her a way out. And through her also is a picture of the Navorish in Punjab, as opposed to the grandparents on the old world values. So somewhere they're clashing, and somewhere the old is leading towards the new. And there's another character in the book who's Karmo. She runs the college canteen, the arts college canteen, and her son has got into drug addiction. So she's somebody who meets Nanki off and on in the corridors, and since Nanki is fond of tea, so she visits her shack. So it is a study of this woman who, at one level, is very distressed because, obviously, of a son being a drug addict, and then what she does about it in her own way. How very ordinary people around us have struggles and battles, and obviously it touches on a problem that exists in Punjab. So these are other characters, and for me, they were flowing out of Nanki's spaces. Uh, like Joginder Singh is the grandfather's colleague at one time, and here uh, Karmo is somebody she meets in the college space. She could be like an every woman. She could be somebody we know. And so is Nina, very stock character in Punjab. So it also gives me an opportunity to understand what is current, what is conventional today, and what was current and conventional when the grandparents were at their prime, and how Nanki tries to negotiate these spaces and arrive at her own understanding of how she thinks she wants to, look at life. So I think I should stop here. And since you asked me to read something, there is one passage that I can read. Now, this is more abstract, I thought, something that even those who don't know about the book, they can connect to. It is about love, and it is about it is placed at a time when Nanki's heart broken after this, you know, disaster of a teenage love. So, uh, and sometimes experiences catapult us into understanding of basics in a very adult way. So here is this little passage that I'll read out about love. So here goes. But then, this treachery is at the heart of love, that two people's needs are never the same. That while it involves fulfillment through another, you understand more about sovereignty. That your desire will always be in an elusive chase with the other person's independence of will. That some might just be transiting through love because they are conditioned to do things in appropriate stages, like other life activities, while others might be totally transformed by it. That two in love might be looking in one direction, but never at the same thing. The struggle to get the lover to see what you see is futile, and yet a deep desire remains. Much later, she would grow up and learn more. And even though Nanki felt bereft of love, heartbroken, and utterly abandoned, even someone seemingly steeped in love could experience heartbreak. When that basic urge to be understood by the lover remains unfulfilled, the desire to be understood is primeval too. It might be forgotten for a while in the euphoria of new love, but it resurfaces like a lost child come home. You can't shut the door, you have to take it in. The tussle then begins. And even though body has entwined with body, Vows have been whispered into the lover's ears in the throes of unimaginable passion. There's a pang still. One has not felt understood by the lover, and that is a different quality of loneliness, a constant dull hammering, like static hum, dissonance, ultimately translates into plain inability to see the other's view. We shout betrayal, we shift blame, we feel inadequate when it is just plain inability. So the intimacy has a narrow gap running across, like a rift between two continents. And it's only when you examine it from above that you really see it. You realize that the gap might have breadth of a hairline, but it is deep. Its darkness stretches all the way down into a free falling abyss. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a beautiful, beautiful portion of the novel that you read out, and I believe that it will resonate with everybody, including our students here. So that was beautiful, and it was a wonderful session. You brought so many ideas together. We will begin with a question from Murari Prasad, which is here, which is there in your chat box, where he says he's very delighted to hear the engaging account of your novel. He also feels that a fictional account of a traumatic event like partition is apt to give short shrift to representational exactitude. If so, how have you negotiated this risk?
Thank you for that question, and it forces me to reflect. And I'm really happy that Murari Prasad sir could join today. Happy to see him and happy to hear this observation. Yes, something like partition, which at one level was totally a political act, and at another level, the loss of it, the loss emanating out of it, becomes such an individual and a personal experience. And I think while history looks at a big picture, and in fact, in some ways, partition is something that we would not even like to talk about in mainstream history. And we haven't really given it that space, according to the magnitude of, the event that it was. We haven't given it that corresponding space in history. And I think it is through literature that we are getting a counter picture. And since literature can be very, very subversive in many, many ways, perhaps, the earlier accounts of partition were drowned in this ecstasy of, the nation having been born and, the euphoria of independence. The suffering of the fringes, the suffering of the common people was never really even acknowledged in the mainstream as such. As for people of Punjab, somehow there is this cultural difference that in Punjab we tend to be more inclined towards activity than towards reflection. Both the good and bad part about a Punjabi common mentality. Perhaps even our literature, that reflection about partition, has fallen short. It is now, I think, and I also feel that it is also about the trauma that it was. That it's not easy to open those wounds and talk about it while they are fresh. The reflection comes a generation later, 2 generations later. So obviously, I can talk about my understanding of partition, which would be secondhand. It's not that I witnessed partition. So it would include elements of imagination and somewhere how I understand that picture. which I derived from history, which I derived from accounts in the family. So I'm just trying, to bridge that. And I'm not making a claim that I'm the one who's witnessing it. It is, there's a whole lot of imagination. And since it is Nanki's perspective, it's 2 generations down the line. But yet, for the Punjabi identity, how central that whole thing is. And yet, for somebody like me, 2 generations down the line, who's not lived through partition, and yet somewhere it's a part of my subconscious. And when I write my first book, I feel that what are the things that make me? That is one of the things that make me. So I would say.
Thank you, ma'am, for that wonderful response. And when you say that, the partition has not been spoken of enough, you're very right, because that is what mostly, for example, Ashish Nandi in one of his essays talks about how this is entirely a psychological wound, in the nation's mind. And much of our conflict is probably because we never came to terms with it. So whether it was the Bengal partition or whether it was the Punjab partition, we did not have, because we wanted to kind of turn our faces away from blaming ourselves. So that it remains one significant reason why the country psychologically hasn't healed, and we still have communal conflicts. So the way that you have dealt, as you say, the way you speak of partition as a palimpsest, it comes in every generation, and every generation deals with it in its own way. It's wonderful. We really look forward to reading this novel. I, on a personal note, had a question which you have clarified in many ways. I had a question about the title of the novel itself, because the title, In the Land of Lovers, because your title speaks about Punjab itself, and you clarified that you are talking about the place and the development of the place. So it's a Bildungsroma of Nanki, as well as it's a story of the development of Punjab. So because you talk about Punjab as the land of the lovers. I'm sorry, I'm having some disturbances. There's a barat going from my street, and so you can hear that celebration. So when you talk about this particular title, In the Land of the Lovers, that kind of, along with your emphasis in the text on folk art, and when you talk about canon making, and you talk about the question of who is an artist, that brings in, I believe, a mythological framework into your novel. Would you like to talk about that? Is it a symbol? There seems to be a lot of deep symbolism, cultural symbolism inherent in the novel. Would you like to talk about that?
Vasundhara, can I add something?
Yes, certainly, sir. Please.
Yes, I also had this little question in my mind that this title, In the Land of Lovers, the language is evocative. And in my mind, it evoked the title that Guru Baksh Singh had, he gave to his stories, Ishq Jina De Haddi Rachya. That's the title he gave. Love in the bones, the love in their bones. And this is the kind of, evocation that I have about this title. But your book is something different. So how is it that you came around to hit upon this title?
So actually, initially my working title for a very long time was Nanki, a Punjab Kissa. For the longest time. That is what the manuscript was called. That is what, I worked under for all the entire span that I was working on. And that was the initial title that I thought about. Later, when we were at a stage when we're putting our heads together, and, it had gone through the stages of editing, my editor thought that it could be something that could be confused with Nanki, the historical character. That perhaps, the title, what the title would reflect would be a story perhaps about Nanki, the historical character. And I thought that that made sense from the perspective of somebody who's just picking the book. A title has to, give out the right signal. And then she asked me to rethink the title. And I was having this conversation with a colleague of mine on the side, not per se about the title of the book. And he just made this statement in a very offhand way. He said, Punjab ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਕਾਮਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਵੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਜੋ ਹੈ ਕਿਸਾਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਵੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਧਰਤੀ ਵੀ ਹੈ ਪਰ ਜੋ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੇ embrace ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਆਸ਼ਿਕ ਹੈ. you know he just said it, and it just it just stayed with me, and I thought about it. And what it means is that Punjab has been the land of workers, it's been the land of of the farmers, and it's been land of soldiers. But what Punjab has really embraced is the lovers, and you know about all the love kissas in Punjab. But what I had in mind is not ex lover or Y lover. What I have in mind is the spirit of Punjab, which is that of lover. It is the classical classic versus romantic kind of binary, where you have a romantic people who are invested in the idea of change, and they don't want to be in the old molds. And for them, the way we put love on a pedestal in Punjab, the way it comes out through kissas, and it is about a certain spirit of this land. And I thought that would be a fit for this novel, not only because it talks about the spirit of Punjab, but also because there are myriad characters in the book. So all of these characters, I would say, in their own way, in their own passions, they unfold a kind of psyche of a lover, you can say. So that was the idea.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for handling this question so well and for illuminating many aspects of the novel for us. Our students have several questions. I'll make a selection of these. So one of these questions is, when did you know that you wanted to become a writer?
Well, like I said, I've been writing for a long time, but then that was critical essays, that was more academic work. And that one is doing because one is in a profession, and that academic writing also gives you a rigor. I don't want to be cynical about academic writing. The kind of rigor that you develop in academic writing, minding your P's and Q's, and really, going into detail, the kind of patience that it develops in you. It's almost like a muscle that you are training. So you train that muscle through academic writing, and that has helped me, and that has held me in good stead. But somewhere in 2017, I felt that this novel was taking root, and it was so much about not just where I was rooted and what my personal experience was. It was talking about a particular generation. And I feel that that is also one thing about literature, that we talk about a particular context. So I felt that this, story about Nanki's growth, about her coming of age, was moving in all these directions. And these were all people I knew, in my surroundings. It is, our environment, and it is our experience, and it somehow, needed to be told in this form. And I would get this vision of this young girl walking through this green stretch. अब मेरे कॉलेज के पास एक green stretch है that we call the Leisure Valley. It's like stream, dry हो जाती है, seasonal नाला type है, और उसके around it's landscape beautifully with bamboos and everything. It's called the Leisure Valley. So sometimes when I'm free from class, I play the truant and I just take a walk there. And I started to get this vision of Nanki taking a walk in the Leisure Valley, and this whole image of a woman artist taking a walk and ruminating about these questions that are central to us about our identity, about art. Because यहाँ पे जो फुलकारी है, या जो culture है, या जो art है, that has connections with identity in a very deep way. I think these are very cultural symbols that are embedded deep within us. So I'm sanguine about this, and I feel that we need to bolster this connection. So one thing led to the other. It wasn't so strategically planned as it might sound in hindsight. बहुत impressionistic था, but gradually, then the editors also, they shape it for the world. You shape it for yourself. Writing is a very solitary thing, and novel, it long blocks of time, and you are just with yourself. And then when you send it out to the publication world, it's a whole different kettle of fish. And then, but I'm glad, that I could hold on to what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that. We have another question, and we have a student asking, what is your opinion about a good story or about good storytelling? How do you think that we can create a story that keeps the reader engaged? So, what, in your opinion, matters most in storytelling?
I'm liking the questions. They're all forcing me to reflect. But then again, there are no formulae in literature. Had it been that, then we all would get those formulae and it would become very easy. जो किसी भी लिटरेचर का टेस्ट है वो उसके अंदर ही है, वो बाहर से नहीं. वो मैं आपको कुछ नहीं बता सकती. I can't say ये हो वो हो, क्योंकि बहुत बार जो हमें अपील कर जाता है उसका उन टचस्टोन से कुछ लेना देना नहीं होता जिसके बारे में हम पढ़ते हैं. That is precisely the reason why literature is what it is. It's a territory which is hard to explain. It's a territory which is hard to teach, because it comes with all these ambiguities. So there is the writer, there is the reader, and what is created in between.
Wonderful. Writer, the
Where-
reader, and what is created in between. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that thought. We also have questions. Students want to know, how long did it take you to write the novel, and which part was the most difficult for you? What part of the novel was the most challenging for you?
So it took me the physical act or the first draft of the novel. I wrote fast, in fact, less than a year, 8 to 9 months. But then there are revisions and there are multiple drafts. So वो जो hard work होता है और close reading का work होता है, that is where the sweat is. और बहुत बार जो आप लिख लेते हो और फिर उसको revisit करते हो, वो आपको convincing नहीं लगता. फिर आप उसको रीराइट करते हो. तो हर राइटर का जो स्टाइल है वो अलग होता है. इट्स अ वेरी पर्सनल थिंग. बट फॉर मी, एवरी टाइम आई सिट डाउन टू रीड, आई टेंड टू एडिट, and it helps to revisit the manuscript after some hibernation. मुझे ये लगता है कि hibernation बहुत जरूरी है. By hibernation I mean you put the first draft and then don't look at it for some time, and then go back to it, period of 2 months, and then you will see what you have not been able to see earlier. वो एक अलग तरीके से आपको नजर आता है. थोड़ा स्कैरी भी होता है, because आपको लगता है, oh my god, okay, I wrote this, because there are some things you're consciously paying attention to and some things you're just totally missing. And then when you revisit it, sometimes those things catch your attention. Another challenge about novel writing is that one, it is a very personal, it's a very solitary task, which demands, like I said, blocks of time. But when you are re-looking at it, it's very important to develop the double vision, which is that second time you're also looking at it from a reader's perspective. So thoda sa things have to come together at a rational level also. So these are some challenges. other than, of course, polishing the language, polishing your P's and Q's, which is also laborious. But that, to a certain extent, is mechanical. That the copywriters, copy editors will also do for you. One run through your book, two run through your book, three, or whatever level of editing goes on. But you are engaging at an ideational level, the level of the structure. So you have to look at it with fresh eyes from time to time. And I think you should take your time. Never ever rush.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am. We have another question. Uh, if you could talk to the students about your younger writing self, I guess they want to ask about the process of maturity that you have developed as a writer. So, how have you transformed as a writer, or what new things have you been thinking of writing lately?
I think literature is very interesting. And especially because I teach literature, so वो भी एक आपको understanding देता है. वो ये है कि एक ही piece of writing होता है जो different stages पे हम differently पढ़ते हैं. You know, uh, you could read the same poem as a school student, and then as a college student, and then at a more mature stage. Then at our stage, when you're teaching that, you see how differently we have also started reading that poem. That's nothing but experience. It's life's experience. When you read a certain word on page like marriage, and you see that there's a whole novel about marriage like Madame Bovary, you have read it in a certain way, but post that experience yourself, you started reading it in a different way. So literature and human experience, because after all, literature is about human condition. And another interesting thing about literature is that the most central human experiences remain the same. वो दुनिया बदलती जाती है, तभी तो sciences of a particular era can be redundant, but literature can't be redundant. So when Shakespeare talks about love, it still evokes something within us. Because the same, I mean, if remove all the trappings and you see the condition, the human condition, loss and love and grief, it remains the same. So that is the most interesting thing about literature, that you can never exhaust your readings. You will always read it with fresh eyes. And this is the most interesting thing about us human beings. This activity is the most interesting. It's the most sophisticated thing we've done with language. Pehle to language, it's a gift to our species. And then what a sophisticated thing we produced out of that. Literature is something very sophisticated if you think about it. So I would say that as a young person, I was a young person with limited experience. And as you grow, your experiences grow. And I think it's a depth as you keep growing. It's the same poem you can see with a certain 3D, which you have not been able to see earlier. So good and bad experiences, pleasant and unpleasant happenings, they all add up to you. So as a writer, I think what you should seek is experiences. All kinds of experiences.
Thank you, ma'am. And I believe that with this, we have come to the end of a brilliant session. We are very privileged that we got to hear you, because you were able to, and you are, the proper mix of a creative and a critical person. Being a teacher, as you say, you are able to reflect on your critical or your creative practice, as well as on creative writing in general. And I believe that our students not only got to know about your novel, but they got to know about the art of writing in general, the art of reading in general, and how, as co-collaborators in the project of literary study and creativity, they have a long way to go to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So this has been a very fabulous session, and I would call upon our faculty member, Professor Ashok Dash, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks. Dash sir, are you here?
Thank you, Basu. Am I audible?
Yes,
Am
sir.
I
Yes.
audible to you?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Uh, it has been a very rewarding experience today to hear Sakoon Singh ma'am about her novel. Well, it was not only her novel that he spoke about, but her speech, her deliberations, it had various ramifications. She had talked about the genesis of the novel. She has deliberated upon what the novel is all about. And what is more important, she has left a message to the students who are wishing to be writers or who are budding writers, how they can write well. Okay. So this has really widened their horizons of understanding literature. And with that, I'm sure they will be carrying out their creative activity in a more meaningful manner. Ma'am, I was also a little bit confused throughout this session about the title of your novel. But when Basu raised this issue and when Guruptesh Singh sir raised this issue and the way you clarified it, it became crystal clear how this title is so much apt and justified. This is what literature is. It is not what it is written about, how you perceive it. And this perception varies from person to person. And this has been really gone down well with our audience, with our students, which are manifested in the type of questions they have asked. I, from the core of my heart, and on behalf of the Department of English, extend my heartiest thanks to you for being with us today and enlightened us in that brilliant manner. I also thank Guruptesh Singh sir to be with us and to ask such beautiful questions which have widened our knowledge on this subject. I also extend my thanks to the faculty members, to our students, and all the brilliant audience who have been present today, this evening. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. And over to you, Yeye sir, for the afterword.